All right, so today I'm so happy to welcome Anita Nowak to talk about empathy. Empathy is a subject that I hold dearly in my heart for business.
Me too.
And so, Anita, can you maybe talk about yourself? Who are you?
Sure. I'm born and raised Montrealer, and I teach at McGill University. I've been teaching social entrepreneurship and social innovation for many years now, and this fall I'm teaching leadership. That's a big passion and joy of mine because I get to co-create a learning environment with young millennials that I find super fascinating. My background, I did some corporate work, and then in 2004 I made a very big decision based on my values to work forevermore in the nonprofit sector. And that took me through the world of fundraising for some time until I finished my PhD. And then I was able to do some work in social innovation and social entrepreneurship, primarily at McGill, but also with other nonprofit organizations.
So, you're one of those people that has made the shift to make a difference.
Yes, yes.
So, let's talk about empathy. Why the subject of empathy? Why is that? Do you hold this subject dear to your heart?
Great question. So, for my research, for my PhD research, I interviewed social entrepreneurs. So those are people who are already committed for their life and their calling to social change, sustainable, positive social change. And I did interviews with them to understand their lives a little bit better, to see if they had anything in common in terms of why is it that they decided to commit themselves to social change. And it all distilled down to this concept of empathy and acting on empathy for others. So through the research that I did about empathy, I came to realize that the word is often used as a synonym with other words that don't mean the same thing. So I put empathy on a continuum. It's called an altruistic emotion continuum. It's all the good words. But it starts with pity on one side, goes to sympathy, goes to compassion, and then empathy. And when you pity someone, you look down on them. There's a power differential. Oh, you poor person. And then as you make your way across the continuum, empathy is where we recognize that we share a common humanity. And we may have been born to different circumstances, different parts of the planet, different opportunities, but we are all the same. And any kind of social change work that is predicated on the idea of empathy has different outcomes than anywhere else on that continuum. And I define empathy as the innate trait that unites us in our common humanity. So empathy is a really important concept for me because it facilitates connection, and then when action is followed by that initial empathy, the action is super powerful, super meaningful, and super purposeful for everyone involved.
So I can directly make the link with my work, conscious leadership. So when I hear empathy, I hear a very high consciousness level. So it's really about putting focus on other people. And when using maybe our power, our position, resources to help others. So what difference do you think empathy could make in business?
A ton of difference. Not only in terms of providing a space for colleagues and then across the ranks to come together as human beings first instead of colleagues first, to recognize that we're all walking around with a set of circumstances that brings our collective stress up. I mean, climate change is affecting all of us, but then all of us as human beings are part of our own little unique families where there are stresses and expectations. So if we actually recognize that we're all human beings showing up to organizational work first, then we could find ways of being more caring with one another and collaborating more, creating this collective genius that is possible when we know that people together, are collectively working towards something. So empathizing is the gateway to all of that possibility.
What I hear is it's also the gateway to connection. And for leading people, we need to connect. We just talked about that in your class before. A leader is someone who guides people towards a vision, but people need to follow. So I think empathy is the basic. And I think in business, we often forget we're leading humans. Most organizations are like machines. So if you were to advise a leader to maybe embrace empathy or introduce more empathy in their team, what would you advise them to do?
It's a question I ask my students every semester, and I say it's a verb. What verb comes to your mind if you wanted to be a more empathic leader? And I get a lot of different answers, and somebody smart in the class will say it's about listening. And I think that the first step towards empathizing is to hold space, to actually listen. Because we spend most of our time reflecting on what we want to say in response to somebody else who's talking to us. And that is especially heightened when we're in conflict. So I think really growing the listening muscle and being present for other people is an important way for leaders to become more empathic.
I love that. I think the word that came to me is another L word, is love. And listening is part of love. You know, they say, one coach of mine says, where there's the most communication is where there's the most love. And I think listening is an undervalued skill in leadership. We mostly teach people to communicate. And we think that because we've told them they're going to do it, which is very rarely happens. I think listening creates a space for people to actually listening to you after. So I really, really love that. So you're writing a book.
Yes.
So how's that progressing?
I've been working on it for a number of years. I've also fallen in love, got married, and had a child. So there's been some other
You've embraced
priorities.
empathy in your own life.
Pardon me? Yeah, I've been
empathetic.
That's it. It's going well. The book is called The Empath Strike Back, and it's a manifesto for change. It's actually a love letter to the market that I'm aiming to speak to are women, because I think women already recognize that the way the world is organized right now has to change. There's something intuitive within women to know that this is not sustainable. I'm not saying that there aren't men that see the same thing, but generally speaking, my audience is primarily a female audience. It's a love letter to my friends, to my girlfriends. So the primary audience, you can imagine, is sort of the women who watch Ellen and read Oprah magazine. But my secondary audience is millennial young people who care about creating a better world. And it's a series of chapters that tell stories about people who are already creating positive change as a way of inspiring. And it's the 5 primary chapters are how the self, you personally can engage in empathic action, how your family can get involved, how your community, how your schools, and how your organizations. And the bookends to those chapters is really speaking to the crises, the multiple crises that we're in, and new ones that are coming down the pike as a result of the technology of the 4th Industrial Revolution. But the end of the book is where this has taken a bit of time for me to have the courage to be vulnerable enough to put myself out there, is to say all the work of social change is both political and spiritual. Political from the point of view, we cannot accept the status quo anymore and something has to change. And spiritual from the point of view of we personally have to transform in alignment with the social transformation that we want to see in the world. So it's a call to action book, and I look forward to birthing it.
No, I'm looking forward to the birth as well. You mentioned the women. In my language, I talk about the feminine energy, which is present in both men and women. And I fully agree with you that empathy can actually transform the world with love, with a lot of other things. So I look forward to that, and I'm really happy that we had this conversation.
Thank you, Stéphane.
Thanks a lot, Anita.
Thanks for coming to my class.
All right, thank you. Thank you, guys.